Alright, what I'm going to show today is how to trim something on a chuck. And you can see I've got a small pitcher because of the way that I cut it. It has a little bit of extra weight. Because in order to do that, you have to throw it relatively thick, and then sometimes it's not too heavy, but this one I'm going to trim a little bit. I'm not going to trim the bottom, I'm going to trim this part right here. So you take a chuck, which is just you can make a chuck, with stiff clay and just use it one time, or you can make them and bisque fire them. And that's what this is. It's a bisque. First you center it, and then you tack it down. I'm going to put a little bit of water on the wheel, like I usually do for tacking anything down, so that the clay will stick to the wheel head. So, you need at least 3 places, and you want to make sure that it's secure. So, and then I'm going to create a coil that will cushion the piece so I don't mess up making marks from the chuck. And run a relatively even coil. Be right back. Roll it out. Alright, same thing here. You want to dampen, not too wet because you don't want it to just wet enough that the clay will stick to it. So then you just put the coil around, and this will help cushion the piece when you're, you can even throw it on there if you want, like this, so it's even. But you don't want too much water on it, because then it will. So I'm just adding a little bit of clay here and evening it out a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, I just remembered sometimes it's better to center the chuck after you've done this. I may have to do that. I try it both ways sometimes. But sometimes I get it when it's just. Well, that's pretty good. I don't have to do much adjusting there. Alright, so that's pretty centered. And you can just kind of push it a little bit and it'll go even more centered. I need my trimming tools. I like the larger loop tool for most of my trimming, but I have this just in case I want to use it, because it is a smaller piece. So let's start by getting the base however narrow you want it. That one's dull, so I'm going to use this one. You gotta make sure your tools are clean. I cleaned most of my tools before I sat down, but I forgot about these. So I'm just getting that clay off there, and I'm going to, right at that edge there is where I'm going to make my definition of kind of a change, a transition there. And I don't have to cut too much. So this is just defining the shape a little bit. There's a transitional movement from one direction to the other. And I'm going to put a handle on this as well. But I don't put the handle on until afterwards, because you want to make sure you don't cut in too far into it too. So a little bit of water right on the edge here and kind of smooth it out. When I don't trim the bottom, I sometimes pop them like that so that they go concave. So that's all I need there, and it should just come right up. Now I've got to clean it up a little bit because the clay kind of stuck there, but I don't want to get rid of my pattern there. I have striations from the cut of the wire, which is a braided wire like this. So, and then you throw it from the inside and it twists a little bit. So that's that. And I have a handle that's ready for this. So I'm gonna get that, and it needs a little bit of water in it. I usually pull at handles the same time I make the work, but this time I didn't because it's porcelaneous clay, so I didn't want it to crack, which I've had some problems with cracking because I in the past I've just thought, oh well, I'll just make it like I make my stoneware, but porcelain is not as forgiving. So on the stoneware, the water evens itself out, but in the porcelain it doesn't. So they shrink more, and you need to take that into consideration when you're putting on handles. So I've started doing my handles for porcelain a little different. This doesn't look like porcelain because it's got a lot of ball clay in it, but so I would call it a porcelaneous stoneware. It still has that kind of shrinkage so this one's been formed, dried out almost a little too much, but I can dip it back in water. I've already done that once today, and it will shape a little more. So I'm gonna put it on here, kind of hold my finger behind it, and try and merge it in there. And then bend it. Oh, it is too. It's a lot. It's really not wet enough yet. Well. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to pull it. Put that on. I'm gonna use this clay here. This is a little drier, so maybe it'll work better. And then I'll just cover it. That's another way to deal with it, is just cover it up so it dries really slow and the water evens out that way. Just leaving it out in the studio, that piece dried overnight, so I made it yesterday and it dried out. So seeing my mistakes may actually help you. So I don't do porcelain as much as stoneware. The stonewares I have been using are really forgiving. You can get away with a lot. So not as elegant as the one I've made, but oh well. It will work. Put a little bit of routine blood. Go. A little tiny picture. kind of awkward looking. I don't usually make my pictures this way. Now I'm gonna show how to put together a two pieces thrown off the hump to make a chalice or a goblet, whatever its purpose winds up being, whether it's a drinking vessel, just for daily use, or whether it's maybe used for the Eucharist. I have made some of those. People ask me to make that, and foot washing bowls, things like that. I've had different kinds of ecclesiastical requests for objects used in different spiritual practices. So, and I'm not averse to that. I think that's a legitimate thing. I make tea bowls too. I don't know if they're ever used for the tea ceremony, but I think in one case they were. There was a club on the Columbus State University, place that I got some education and studio classes in the early 21st century. So I'm just getting this ready. It was thrown off the hump, and I want to prepare it to receive the. You notice I didn't tack that down. It actually stuck pretty well. I'm not sure if that's gonna actually be a good idea, but we'll see. I can feel this. When I throw off the hump, I can't control it quite as well as I can when I throw. So there's a little bit more clay than I might want. I'd rather have a little more than not too much and have a hole in the bottom of it. So I just kind of waste my throwing. What I'm going to do here is put this here, but they both need water. They're pretty stiff, and so I'm going to put a little bit of water there. If you have really thick slip, it sometimes works better for this type of joining. I generally use water when I'm joining stuff. So alright. Now if I did have some thick slip, it'd be down at the bottom of that bowl, but I don't. I just put water in here, so it's not fresh, but it's not quite as maybe I do have some I can use for slip. So I'm just going to smear a little bit of wet clay here, and that'll kind of interface there, and a little bit of water. I'm going to sponge here, so that's too much water. But you still want the grooves there, so then push down. I'm going to tack this down so I don't have a problem with it. If I put more pressure on it, I'm going to have a problem, so I'm going to tack it down a little bit. It's nice when I don't have to tack it down, because then, like bowls sometimes are wide enough, they'll stay on there a little better, because then I don't have as much cleanup to do. So let's see how close this is. So I'm going to get a little bit of water here and put some pressure here, kind of line this up. Whoops. So this is what happens. It slips. So you have to redo it. And it's still wet there, so. Another thing that I do sometimes is go down with this to see if it's, I can do that. Go kind of put some pressure on the inside. Whoops, do it again. This is not going well. And so I don't do these every day, so every time I do them, it's a little bit of a challenge. So to make them come out right, and I usually do, but I improvise a lot in my whole practice. So one thing I could do, which I don't really do this very often, is put a little teeny piece of clay and that'll help keep it in place until I get it where I want it. And then I can trim. So I'm gonna add this because I just want to get this done. And that'll hold it in place. But you see it's wobbly at the top. Well, I'm gonna fix that. It may take me a little bit to do that, but I am gonna fix it. Alright, so now I've got that. And if I wet this just a little bit, I can probably true it up. There we go. That's good. So what I know that I have is, I don't want it to twist on me. I had a really smooth surface there. So I'm gonna go back and kind of try and get that back. Actually, I'm gonna trim some of that. I could feel too that this was pretty thick, so. I've seen some Chinese potters working that trimmed like crazy, especially like porcelain. They get a really thin porcelain. So it's translucent. But for most things, I try and have it thrown to where that I don't have that much trimming to do. If I trim, it's because I want to. It's because I've made the piece to trim. So I get a different look to it than, but most cups, most pitchers, most things with flat bottoms, I don't really trim that much. So let's see. I'm gonna look at the side, and I'm gonna do what I said I was gonna do earlier. Go back down in here and kind of like press it a little bit, just to make sure it's smooth and connected on the inside. And of course, I've got to make sure it's where I want it again. You don't want to put too much pressure there, because if you do, you'll wind up having it twist on you coming off. This is pretty stiff, so I don't have as much to worry about. And there's different ways you can treat this. You can have it a continuous kind of a curve, so it goes one way and then changes directions, or you can make a defining point there. I think I'm going to make this one. Let's see. I'm going to put a little line there. Actually, I don't like that. I'm just going to make this one smooth. Like I said, I don't got some things every day anymore. I teach, so I don't throw quite as much as I used to. I like to make goblets, at least, several every now and then. I just made this one yesterday at the end of the day after I was doing other stuff. Teaching, there's a lot of responsibility that doesn't have anything to do with working on your own work, even though that's part of it as well. If you don't stay in practice, it's harder to teach it. So I make sure that I throw pretty regularly. I just don't do every single object regularly. So I'm smoothing it back out, kind of supporting the top so that it does what I want it to do. And well, that line is still there, so I'm going to try and get rid of it. No. Well, maybe I will leave it. It's a lot of work for one piece. If I was doing a bunch of these, I'd be faster at it. And also, it's like not being right where you can get to your studio right away. This one is stiff enough that I can go ahead and turn it over and make sure that it's like I want it. And then the last thing I do is make sure that it's true. I mean, for some objects, you know, being perfectly round isn't necessarily the goal, but for this particular piece, I want it round. And then there we have it. Oddly enough, my goblets have a little bit of the same feeling of the first ones I ever did. You can see this is kind of wider than here, so in a way these proportions are a little funky, but it's not going to fall over for sure. All right, and now I'm going to trim the bowl. I'll make sure your wheel head's clean, and because it's still wet enough, I could probably, this one I think I can trim. Now one of the first things I do is I like check to see the weight. So this one is one that doesn't have very much excess, so I just cut a little here and cut a little there, and just to give it a foot. And that's basically what I do with my bowls. You just tap it to get it in the center. You're centering the bottom, which is at the top right now, and then popping it, and that will help it stick. And then I think I can do this one without putting any clay on it. And then start by saying how narrow or how wide do I want the foot. So then you mark that and go down from there, cut into the side, and this won't take very long because there's not a whole lot of clay. You can leave the throwing marks, or you can get rid of them. It's a a choice that you can make. I sometimes leave them and sometimes don't. Or not throwing marks here. In this case, it's tool marks. So I have been alternating between a kind of a spiral that I've done for years, which it's not original one. Got it from seeing other potters, both in books and in person. And then I've also, so now I've defined the foot, and I can smooth this a little bit. What you don't want to do is cut here, because if you cut at the foot, and then it winds up being, you have to compensate for it and cut even deeper on the other one. So if you're gonna do, if you've only made enough clay just to trim the foot and not any other trimming, then you want to make sure this stays high enough so you don't trim that part that much. So you see I just softened it with my finger. So now I'm pretty much near the end, and all I got to do is put my spiral in there. You can do a flat bottom. It's not, there's no rules about that. And that's pretty typical of my trimming right there. So, and that has a little bit of weight at the bottom, and that's good because it keeps it stable. You don't want too narrow of a base for a bowl, because if you do, then it'll wobble or fall over when you're eating out of it. You want it stable on the table. Stable on the table, as they say. But who says it? I just said it, right? I put some marks here. That's usually where I do some carving. I'll put some slip there and then carve it. So I'll do that a little later. And the last thing I do, of course, is mark it. I put my stamps up. So I got to do that before it winds up being too. Now this one is similar in terms of, I threw this one kind of thick. It was really wet clay. So I am going to tack this one down. All right. And I'm also going to do something else with this. No matter how much I try this, I couldn't thin this out enough. So I like these rib marks. I did it on purpose. I mean, not rib marks, my finger marks. I did a kind of consistent pull in the last pull, and made these finger marks that I think I'm going to shave it in a pattern the other direction. So I'm going to have a kind of a cross pattern on it. Let's see how much it weighs after I trim it. I don't trim just to get the weight off, but it is one way. I usually trim because I've planned to trim, especially when I'm throwing a lot. You want to make sure that you don't cut too much, because if you don't have enough clay there, you're going to cut through it, and it takes years sometimes before you can, I know it did for me, before you quit cutting through the bottoms. And even occasionally, my depth perception is not as good as it used to be, so even occasionally I do things like that. Alright, I'm not going to cut too much on the bottom, so I pushed it in with my finger. I'm just going to do the pattern. See, it's pretty thin there, so it's a good thing I didn't. Alright, so there we have it. And that's all the pieces that I did that I needed to work on, except for one other one that I'm working on, a two-part piece. And give me 1 second. See what I need. These are called sure forms, and I learned to use one of these. I mean, I went back to school in my 40s, so you can learn at any age. And even though I had been a professional potter for years before I went back, there were things that I picked up from the other teachers that I had. One was more conceptual. That was the one in my graduate school at FSU. And of course, the other one, when I started a master's in education, that was Jeff Caller, but he used a sure form. And I thought, wow, that's a good tool. They wear out pretty well. It's hard to find the replacement blades. You just have to buy another one. Harbor Freight sells them. But you see that it gives me a kind of two different kinds of pattern. And I'm slightly doing it at an angle, so it gives a little bit of more information. I want to leave some of the markings from before because I liked them, but you know, I was kind of didn't want to do it. I just realized that the clay was so wet. Hard to throw it thin. So it's generally the way porcelain is, even though this is porcelain and stoneware, not really technically necessarily pure porcelain, or whatever you want to call it. Pure is a weird word. It's one of my objections to the idea that porcelain is the clay to use. You know, people think, oh, it should be more expensive. Well, when you buy it, yeah, it probably costs a little bit more, the clay does, and when you buy the materials to make porcelain, they are somewhat more expensive, but the firing process is the same. A lot of the glazes are the same. Some porcelains are fired higher than stoneware, but not all of them. I did know somebody that fired a cone 15 in a wood kiln. They used saggers. That was DX Gordy. Pretty interesting. But that was before there was a lot of talk about, you know, fuel consumption and that kind of thing. So I fire at all the work that I do at around cone 6. I haven't fired a cone. I was fired a cone 10 to 12. Actually, the kiln was done, heat was uneven, so throughout the time I used it, the wood burning kiln made by DX40, it would fire between 6 and 12.